Welcome back to the Foundry by Forge College. Okay, so if you've been hanging with us through our Bitcoin fundamentals track, you probably remember our last lesson. We took a hard look at that terrifying, completely system-breaking bug, transaction-level double spending. You know, the ultimate digital counterfeit. Well, today, we're zooming way out. We're stepping into the consensus mechanisms and security module to bridge the gap from that single individual transaction level all the way up to the grand, honestly kind of mind-bending puzzle of network-wide agreement. I mean, how do we actually get thousands of strangers on the exact same page? Well, figuring that out, that is the origin and the entire purpose of Nakamoto consensus. Let's get into it.
Here's our quick blueprint for this explainer. We're going to start with the double spend dilemma, look at the brilliant weighted lottery metaphor, cover the core goals of consensus, identify the critical security assumptions making this all work, and then weigh the engineering trade-offs before wrapping the whole thing up.
All right, Section 1, the double spend dilemma, but from a macro scale view.
So here is the absolute trillion-dollar question, right? How on earth do thousands of completely anonymous computers agree on who owns what when there's absolutely no central boss dictating the rules? Think about traditional banking. A centralized server just looks at its database and says, yep, Alice has the money, Bob doesn't. And that's the end of the story. But in a totally open, Wild West environment where anyone can jump in, drop out, or, try to lie to score a free coffee, who actually gets to decide which transaction is the real one?
Which brings us to Section 2, the weighted lottery. This is the core metaphor for how consensus actually happens. Think about it like this. Imagine a lottery where your computer's hashing power literally prints the tickets. The more real-world power you expend, like the harder your computer actually sweats to solve this insanely complex cryptographic puzzle, the more tickets you hold in your hand. It is kind of like the world's most intense arcade game where you are physically burning electricity just to win. And the prize for all this effort? The exclusive right to write the very next page of the ledger, or as we call it, the next block.
And this physical lottery analogy? It maps so perfectly onto the actual engineering of the protocol. The tickets you hold, those represent your hashing attempts. The winning ticket is, of course, a successfully mined block, and the public announcement of the winner is just when that block gets broadcast to the rest of the network. But, and this is a big but, what happens if two people win at the exact same time? Well, that's where the longest chain rule comes in to save the day. It acts as this totally objective, math-based tiebreaker. Everyone simply looks at the chain that has the most cumulative work behind it and just agrees, yep, that one is the truth. There's no voting, there's no arguing, it is literally just math.
Moving on to Section 3, the core goals. Let's look at the actual design specs of the system.
So, the first absolute must-have goal is Sybil resistance. We all know that on the internet, a bot can pretend to be a million different users, right? Just look at literally any social media poll. If we use simple identity-based voting for consensus, an attacker could just spin up a million fake identities and completely take over the network for free. But proof of work totally flips the script, because it requires burning real physical energy. And here's the kicker. You cannot fake electricity, period. Your influence in this network isn't based on how many fake email addresses you can generate. It is based strictly on the raw, real-world computational power you actually bring to the table.
Which brings us to this seriously brilliant concept called probabilistic finality. Now, in traditional systems, finality is absolute and immediate. You swipe a credit card, boom, it's done. But Nakamoto consensus, it gives us something a little different. When a block is first mined, our confidence in it is actually pretty low. But, and here's the genius part, as each new block gets stacked on top of it, it acts like an extra layer of mathematical concrete. Each new block is a totally independent lottery trial that an attacker would literally have to win in reverse just to undo history. So while finality is never technically 100% guaranteed in a split second, it becomes a mathematical near certainty as that chain grows deeper and deeper.
And honestly, you just can't talk about these goals without talking about money. Since there are absolutely no network police here to enforce the rules, the system has to rely on perfect economic incentives to reward honest players. Remember, miners are expending real-world resources, really expensive hardware, massive electricity bills. To make all of that worth it, the network rewards them with newly minted tokens and transaction fees. But, and this is absolutely crucial, only if they play by the rules and build on the valid chain. If they try to cheat, the network just rejects their block, and they've literally burned a ton of money for absolutely nothing. Economics completely replaces central enforcement. It's a beautiful concept, and it's one you're going to see a lot in our Forge College courses on decentralized systems.
Okay, let's jump to Section 4, critical security assumptions.
Think of these as the fundamental laws of physics for the network.
The absolute most crucial, foundational assumption making this whole thing work is this. Strictly more than 50% of the network's computational power must be controlled by honest participants, period. Because if an attacker ever controls 51% or more of the network's hash rate, well, they can win our weighted lottery consistently enough to actually outpace the entire honest network. They could literally build a longer chain in secret, suddenly broadcast it, and completely overwrite recent history. So the entire system security rests entirely on the fact that honest players are constantly out-muscling the bad actors.
But, raw power actually isn't the only assumption here. We also have to assume that winning blocks propagate really quickly across the global network. In computer science, this is known as timely message propagation. Because think about it, if network messages are delayed, say a miner in Asia finds a block, but it takes 2 whole minutes to reach miners in North America, we're going to get temporary forks and just a massive amount of network confusion. Different parts of the world would literally be building on different versions of reality. So, fast, reliable communication across the peer-to-peer network is absolutely essential for keeping everyone synced up on that same exact longest chain.
Let's move into Section 5, the engineering trade-offs. Because to get these incredible benefits, we have to make some conscious sacrifices. You see, Satoshi had to make some very conscious, pretty heavy compromises when designing this. The network intentionally trades lightning-fast settlement for that probabilistic security we talked about. It trades massive energy consumption in exchange for unfakeable Sybil resistance. And honestly, most importantly, it trades raw throughput, meaning the sheer number of transactions it can process per second, for extreme decentralization. By keeping the blocks relatively small and the process somewhat slow, anyone with just a regular, everyday computer, seriously, maybe even that old laptop currently collecting dust in your closet, can run a validating node and audit the entire global system themselves. That is a huge deal.
But of course, this introduces an extreme, ever-present risk, the infamous 51% attack. If those trade-offs we just talked about somehow become imbalanced, like say, mining becomes heavily centralized in just one region because the electricity there is dirt cheap, or maybe a network upgrade makes it way too hard for regular people to run their own nodes, that honest majority assumption starts to seriously weaken. And if a single actor, or even a colluding group, manages to cross that 51% threshold, they can start censoring transactions and double-spending coins by just rewriting the history of the ledger. It is literally the sword of Damocles constantly hanging over the network.
All right, Section 6, wrapping up. Let's review this blueprint and bring it all together. So, what should you really take away from all of this? Well, we've seen exactly how computational work essentially buys network influence through this genius weighted lottery, which completely bypasses the need for vulnerable, easily faked identities. We've learned exactly why network security strictly requires an honest majority of hashing power just to maintain the true timeline of events. And we've explored how the system's design makes some very deliberate trade-offs, willingly sacrificing pure speed and immediate finality just to guarantee true permissionless decentralization where absolutely anyone can participate.
And really understanding this why, the core origin and purpose of Nakamoto consensus, it perfectly prepares us for our next lesson in this course, which is the mechanics of Nakamoto consensus. That is the explainer where we're going to stop looking at the blueprint from 10,000 feet up and we'll start translating all these grand goals into the actual nuts and bolts. We're talking block production, difficulty adjustments, and the real nitty-gritty of cryptographic hashing.
So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought today. Now that you've seen the blueprint, are you ready to see how this incredibly chaotic engine actually turns over? If you want to master these concepts, dive deeper into the technical mechanics, and explore a whole range of incredible Web3 learning programs, definitely make sure you visit forge.college to continue your learning journey. I've had an absolute blast walking through this with you all today, and I will catch you in the next Explainer.